We, the people, tell the government what to do. It doesn't tell us.
Punitive tax policies and excessive and unnecessary regulations, plus government borrowing, have stifled our ability to update plant and equipment.
As government expands, liberty contracts.
When capital investment is made, it's too often for some unproductive alterations demanded by government to meet various of its regulations. Our aim is to increase our national wealth so all will have more.
But man is not free unless government is limited.
From the moment people settled onto American soil, homelessness was present. People without homes were viewed as delinquent souls who were being punished for their sins. As the years went by, this view altered slightly. The homeless became viewed as people who lack American drive and any contribution to society. Many argue that their current condition is a result of their failures, and thus pollute the streets and sidewalks. Because of this widespread view, regular passerby, along with the most powerful politicians, ignore the homeless and even ridicule them for their destitution. The 70s were years of unrest in America. The Vietnam War dragged on, the economy was plummeting, and chaos ran through the streets.
In May of 1970, 4 students were killed by National Guard troops during a campus protest at Kent State University in Ohio.
People were desperate for change, and they were desperate for financial stability. Ronald Reagan, former governor and Hollywood actor of the state of California, took the stage. And people clung to his promises of big business and ensured safety. As government regulations on corporations decreased, corruption ensued. The rich preyed off of the poor, taking advantage of their newly acquired power. As his policy of Reaganomics dominated American business, the wealth gap expanded greatly and the poor suffered drastically. Reagan especially neglected the needs of the homeless, claiming that they, quote, chose to be homeless, and trusted that private organizations were enough to care for them. To Reagan, taking care of them was not the job of the federal government. Even pop culture reflected the consequences of Reagan's ideas.
That greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed, you mark my words, will not only save Teldar paper, but that other malfunctioning corporation called the USA.
To make matters worse, Reagan failed to help the population of people who needed it most. Vietnam veterans, home from the horrors of war, returned devastated to find that Reagan had cut most of the vital veteran aid programs once available to help them transition to civilian life. In particular, the removal of support to vets outreach centers proved damaging, as veterans were no longer approached directly by vet services. Instead, veterans were expected to seek help themselves, which was more difficult as many did not know where to go. By 1980, unemployment among Vietnam soldiers increased by 44%. Veterans now made up 5.9% of the total unemployed population. Minority and younger vets fared even worse, as 17 to 20% of them remained jobless. In an attempt to eradicate the negative stereotype of the traumatized Vietnam soldier, Reagan's administration created the Vietnam Veterans Leadership Program. The VVLP's primary goal, however, was not to help returning soldiers, but to use propaganda to better the public's view of this unpopular war. Though he tried to display the veterans as proud and free of regrets, many soldiers suffered from high levels of distress. Some had PTSD, which Reagan ignored with an ignorantly positive mentality. Emotional instability and substance abuse often resulted in broken families and failed social interactions, leading many veterans to resort to the streets.
You go to Vietnam, you're actually a human being. You fight for a year and you spend a year in the bush, you literally turn into an animal. You don't even realize how much you change until you come back.
He endured flashbacks. His marriage ended and was diagnosed with cancer due to exposure to Agent Orange. Seeking an escape, Gannon turned to alcohol.
Reflective of his uneducated view of PTSD, Reagan also wrongfully approached mental illness in America. Reagan failed to understand mental health as a real medical condition that needed to be researched, and thus decided research was not worth funding. Reagan's leadership led to the mass deinstitutionalization of hospitals. As a result, many mentally ill patients, along with drug addicts, were discharged and pushed into housing units. Overnight, towns flowed with hundreds of mentally ill. Owners often took advantage of confused residents, cheating them of their money. When the time came for gentrification of these rundown towns, the mentally ill, who could not pay the increased rent, were forced out of their homes into the streets.
They say first they suffered through emptying and closing of hospitals. They say then the dumping of their relatives onto the streets. Then they had the withdrawal of funds for community-based programs, they say. They say in Illinois, because of a withdrawal of $18 million, Governor Thompson has cut from mental health programs. They're now faced with the stoppage of research. What would you tell these people?
Well, I would look into all the things that the charges they've made there to find out if all of these things are true and whether the financial things that they mentioned there are the reason for those cases. I would think that Governor Thompson would like to see that letter.
While the 1980s brought a surging increase of the homeless population, there was also a brief period of awareness. Advocates such as Mitch Snyder fought for the rights of homeless, hoping they would be treated as citizens.
The last 8 years, I've been listening to honorable and sincere people telling me a number of things. Like it'll be good for America if we deregulate, if we stop controlling those corporations, because then everything will move smoothly. And what moved smoothly was $300 billion through the fingers of the people that run the S&Ls.
Today, the consequences of Reagan's actions and inaction remain. Skid Row, located in California where Reagan first took up leadership, houses the most densely populated group of homeless people in the United States. Today, roughly 25% of the U.S. homeless population have a form of mental illness, and around 11% are veterans. But there is hope. During this age of technology and social networking, millennials tend to have a greater awareness of the homeless issue. As Mitch Snyder advocated for the rights of the homeless during the 1980s, people like Brendan Stanton, NCH volunteers, and random YouTubers challenged the public to stop viewing the homeless as lazy rejects and start treating them as valuable human beings who deserve the same rights as the rest of us.
I said, could you please spare a little change for me? I ain't got a chance to eat yet. I'm very hungry today.
But you must go get a job.
You serve your country? What do you think about serving your country? How's that? How's that about serving your country?
Oh, excuse me, sir. Excuse me, sir.
Excuse me?
Did you just buy the child a slice?
Oh, yes, sir.
Thank you, and good night.